Schumer now.
That's right. He joins us now with his thoughts on Bear Stearns. And Senator Schumer, pleasure to have you this morning. We have seen your statement. You spoke to both Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke as well as J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon this morning. What did they say?
Well, you know, they both said that they felt they had no choice but to act. I think they're right. I think the solution here, what they've done, really threads the needle in exactly the right way. No one can claim that this is a bailout. Ask any shareholder of Bear Stearns stock who's getting paid $2. But at the same time, the Fed and one of the strongest financial institutions in the world is standing behind the Bear Stearns entity now so that people will not be so worried. And what's just as important as standing behind Bear Stearns is the idea that they will stand behind other institutions. What we're in here is the closest thing we've seen to a bank panic since the Depression. Right. It's with investment banks, it's with larger investors, but it's the exact same thing. And confidence is so important. The quality of the asset matters less than confidence, and hopefully this move will restore confidence when it comes to some of these other firms.
It is interesting, though, you said Bear Stearns shareholders wouldn't characterize this as a bailout. Obviously, you're right when you look at a stock that was trading in the 80s not long ago. But at the same time, you're talking about the Fed standing behind Bear and others. If that isn't a bailout, a moral hazard issue, then what is?
Well, who do you want to punish here? You should certainly those at Bear are the ones who made the bad decisions and should be. But should some third party who happens to get caught up in all of the cross-lending and swaps and everything else be caught up? And if you run the risk of a full-fledged panic by doing nothing, I think our problem here, and Paulson even said it, is less the moral hazard, which again has been mitigated by the $2 sale, and much more the panic that might spread from one financial institution to the other. And once that starts, you cannot stop it. So it's easy to sit back in the armchair with an intellectual argument, but I got to tell you, the downside far exceeds the upside in terms of not doing anything.
Senator, does this make you want to maybe look again at the repeal of Glass-Steagall?
Well, here's what I think here, and this is a very important argument. Our financial markets have evolved so that we now have three types of entities. We have banks, and they're pretty well regulated. We had investment banks, which were not regulated very much, and now we have hedge funds. And investment banks are getting to the point where they have such interrelationships with regular banks, and they're so large that obviously they're getting to be in a too big to fail situation. That probably means there ought to be a greater degree of regulation. And I think that's something that down the road Congress will look at. Now, the big conundrum here is how do you do it when finance is so international? You can't have one country treating things one way and one country treating things another way, or you just get a total mishmash. And that's the basic problem we face here. How do you, with an international financial system, but national governments, how do you blend the two together? That's the challenge for the next 5 to 10 years.
Not to get emotional here, but, you know, if you look at recent history, by that I mean, say, the last 20, 25 years, it's always the hotshot bankers who get us all into trouble.
Well, that's what capitalism is.
Which leads to the conclusion that maybe we ought to be keeping a closer eye on them.
Well, I think you're right about that. That's what capitalism is, and you have to have the blend. You don't want to snuff out entrepreneurialism, but on the other hand, you have to prepare for these kinds of dramatic downsides. And as the world changes and as financial markets change, you have to change things. One other thing I'd like to say here. I am hopeful that what happened at Bear Stearns will be a wake-up call to President Bush. The bullseye of this crisis is still housing. That's why Bear is weaker. That's why Lehman is weaker. They're far more involved in mortgages than others. And yet, the laissez-faire attitude, don't be involved attitude towards the housing crisis is what's caused this. Now, I would hope that Paulson and Bernanke would go to President Bush and say, take off your ideological blinders. We're in a crisis here. And as you said, the lack of regulation has led us into this. We're going to need some government involvement to get us out of it. If tomorrow there was some assurance that the subprime crisis would not just continue to slope upward, but might flatten out because we would provide some kind of refinancing and some kind of ability to have mortgage counselors, it would help the markets more than anything else. I think Bernanke knows that. He's began to say it Friday. I think Paulson knows it, but he's sort of tied in a box because of the administration's hands-off attitude. The leaders of finance and the economists I've spoken to all agree that the Bush administration, and many of them are conservative, that the Bush administration right now has its head in the sand.
Senator Schumer, we appreciate your taking the time to join us. Thank you. I know, obviously, the senator is in Albany because we will have the new governor of New York sworn in. The big, obviously...